Ukraine is celebrating what it calls its biggest long-range attack in the war with Russia. Smuggled FPV drones have been used to launch a series of major strikes on 40 Russian warplanes at 4 military bases. 117 drones were used by Ukraine's SBU security service, and they claim to have struck 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers. Now, as talks between Russia and Ukraine commence in Istanbul, this attack is being seen as Ukraine's bid to impact negotiations for a better favorable deal. But the war is continuing even though the two sides have agreed to sit on one table. Joining us at this point, Glenn Grant, former advisor to Defence Minister of Ukraine. Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is also with us live. Major General Anuj Mathur, defence expert, joins us live. Let me make a start with you first, Professor Nalapat. What do you make of this strike by Ukraine? What will be the implications of it on the talks in Istanbul, for which delegations have arrived as we speak?
Look, please don't talk about Ukraine. Let's talk about Zelensky, because he's the person in command there. Zelensky does not want peace with Russia, because the fact is, the minute that comes, well, he's out of a job. He would rather go ahead with this war, this purposeless war. And may I point out that in April 2022 itself, the Ukrainian leadership, namely Zelensky, had a choice of ending this war or not. Unfortunately, Boris Johnson and President Biden, sabotaged that and told him, don't worry, we will ensure that we see you through to the end. What neither mentioned was that it was the end of Ukraine that they were talking about, not the end of the war. The reality of the situation is that this is very bad for Ukraine. Ukrainians were ready for peace in 2022 April. They are ready for it now. They want peace. For all independent soundings, you have a lot of biased soundings which are being put out, including, I'm sorry to say, by sources of our northern neighbor, which also want to keep this pot boiling until it deals with, quote unquote, the Taiwan issue. So I want to say, let's not bracket Ukrainians and Ukraine with Zelensky. Zelensky wants the war to continue, and what better way than to plan a major strike, a very, very daring strike, admittedly. Now that he's got permission to hit deep into Russia, my only worry is that this is going to spill out of control and involve the European powers backing Ukraine in a war. And frankly, I don't believe the people of the European Union want that. And let's all remember the fact that where Russia is concerned, way back, in the last century, a man called Hitler, who was in Germany, he tried to finish off Russia. They almost lost Stalingrad, they almost lost Moscow, they almost lost Leningrad in the north, but they hung on. The Russians are tenacious fighters. They're not going to give up. And my worry is that this is going to finally escalate into a European war, which is probably why the Europeans are now nervously building up their militaries. I wish they'd spend that money on their own people and make peace with Russia, because all this is doing is pushing Russia deeper and deeper into the lap of China. And unfortunately, that is manifesting itself in expansionism by population. Chinese population is settling all across the Sino-Russian border and in various other parts of Russia as well. And so the one beneficiary is China. Europeans are not the beneficiary, but they seem to be obsessed with this feeling that Russia will collapse. Well, the last time anybody had that obsession in the previous century, it is not Russia which collapsed today. Thank you.
Glenn Grant, let me draw you in here on what you believe prompted Ukraine to carry out this attack in Russia. Of course, an attack which has been planned reportedly for over a year and a half. And what do you believe, the messaging really was through this strike on Russian air bases?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that I'm sorry that our professor friend is not actually up to date with the facts. And I'm not going to go through all the things that he said, but most of them are Russian nonsense that's repeated all over the place, and he's just copying it.
Let's be civil, Glenn. Let's not call what an esteemed point by nonsense. Let's not get personal or make such remarks. But yes, you can of course rebut what he said without resorting to such unparliamentary language. Please go ahead.
Resorting to anything. I'm just saying.
I want to ask a question. And what has happened? Has the war stopped? All that
no, sir, and nor is it going to in a hurry.
Russians. That's all. I don't want to say anything more with that. Thank you.
No, thank you, sir. Right. This attack has been planned and been working on for 18 months. So the fact that it comes out now is purely coincidental. It's not anything to do with the current talks. That's the first thing. Secondly, the current talks that are going on, the two sides are as far apart as they've ever been. Russia invaded Ukraine. That is a fact. Russia invaded Ukraine and continues to fight and continues to demand more and more of Ukraine every day. That is a fact. You cannot separate Zelensky from the country because he is the president and he is doing what the country wants. And that's a fact. And I was there last week in Ukraine. So I did not find anybody at all, with all the many people that I spoke to, who was anything other than positive about the fact that Russia must not be allowed to take the sovereignty of Ukraine. This is not about peace coming nicely. Ukraine has already said what it will accept for peace, and those things, I'm not sure if the professor has read them, but those things are very clear. They are willing to stop on the current battle line. Russia is not. Russia demands more. They want their children back and they want their prisoners back. They are willing to go for a full prisoner swap. That is fine. They want a 30-day ceasefire, which can then go on for another 30 days. Russia says no. Russia wants all its demands first before there is a ceasefire. That's a fact. Russia has said so. Lavrov has said so in the last week. So here we are. We have two sides that are far apart from each other. This attack will have done something rather special in that it's actually made Russia realize that if you go to war against another country, you expect that country to fight back. You've been doing it with Pakistan. So I think that you have no feet to stand on in that respect. So we are where we are.
No, that's a very bizarre sort of comparison that you're making, Glenn Grant. Pakistan foments terror against India, and if India strikes terror targets in Pakistan, that cannot be equated to what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. So I'd appreciate you keep that out of this conversation, because it has nothing to do with this conversation.
No, it does, because you fought back against terror.
Yes.
You did that quite rightly so. Rightly so. So I'm not criticizing you. I'm saying you did that. But Ukraine, quite rightly, is allowed to fight back against the terror from Russia.
Okay, which they've done through this attack, as you're saying. Now, as far as, of course, these talks in Istanbul are concerned, what sort of impact, though, do you believe this attack will have on those deliberations? As you said, it's something that was being planned for a while. It was not designed to happen just before the talks, but it has. What shadow then will it cast on the negotiations?
Well, I think the first thing is that the Ukrainian side will go in a lot happier than they've been to previous negotiations. And I think that the Russian side will go in very rattled about what has happened, because they've just been shown that they're not the omnipotent second army in the world that they think they are. So there's going to be perhaps an opening there, but for Russia to actually to be softer on Ukraine than it's been demanding in the last few weeks. Ukraine has already made its offers, and its offers are clear. So I don't see any change there on the Ukrainian side. They've compromised a huge amount already. But let's just see if Russia does come in softer, or does it double down and try to be even harder because it feels it's been attacked in ways that it's not expecting.
Well, interestingly, there has not been a statement yet from Kremlin, at least officially, on this incident. So
No.
we have to wait and watch that space for, of course, the official Russian position on what happens next. But, Glenn Grant, as far as, of course, now this attack is concerned, what do you believe the messaging was? Why were these air bases selected? How much was the damage done? We are learning that, some trains also and bridges have been affected as a result of these explosions.
Okay, taking them slightly out of order, the bridges were actually nothing to do with Ukraine. They were just bad workmanship on old Soviet bridges, concrete bridges that have fallen down. This is not the first. Other bridges have fallen down in Russia because they've not been properly maintained. The attack on the air bases was because those aircraft have been used against Ukraine to deliver cruise missiles and bombs. And it was probably understood that there would be no short-range air defense around those airfields because people were expecting long-range drones, long-range missiles for the attack. I just add, if you hadn't already seen it, that apparently the air defense commander in Russia has fallen out of a window. So that was a good choice to attack those. Also, attacking them in the rear was also a good choice because it now opens up the fact that Russia cannot feel comfortable wherever it is. That they now know that Ukraine will attack them in many more places. And yes, the other attacks have taken place, which we're reading about. I think there will be more to come.
Okay, now you, of course, have been advising the defense minister of Ukraine earlier. As far as, of course, this attack is concerned, we are learning that it was being planned for almost over a year and a half. Is that correct?
That's what they say, and I think I quite believe that because of the complexity. I mean, to take drones inside Russia and then build them into lorries. Do
you believe more such attacks than have been planned?
Say that again.
Do you believe more such attacks than have been planned as well?
Well, I don't expect anything the same as this, but I do expect that Ukraine will continue to attack the Russian rear, especially over the Urals, if they can, because this is war, and you have to attack as best you can in a war.
Okay, Professor Nalapat, come in here. Glenn Grant there saying Ukraine wants peace. It's the Russians who aren't agreeing to the modalities of the ceasefire and the prisoner swap. We have to wait and watch how the negotiations now will proceed as a result of this strike. Do you believe the war is only escalating rather than de-escalating, Professor Nalapat?
Yeah, look, frankly, Uday, I don't want, this is an alternate reality. And if he is from the UK, they've been living in that reality for quite some time, which is that you can destroy Russia, the Russian Federation, the way the USSR was destroyed. Ukraine desperately needs a ceasefire to regroup and resupply its forces, and the Ukrainian forces, Zelensky needs that. The Russians know that, and therefore I doubt they're going to accept a ceasefire on these, frankly, unless it's a permanent ceasefire, an armistice. I would really like to point out, Uday, that, the Europeans have been living in an alternate reality. Luckily, America has shifted from that reality now that Trump has come. And now, frankly, they are facing a situation where Trump is unlikely to risk a war with Russia, which, I'm sure our British friend will agree, has got a few tricks up its sleeve and a few weapons up its sleeve, which frankly would be a disaster, and eventually for both sides. So I want to say very clearly, Uday, this is the most irresponsible kind of situation that I've seen. This is akin to April 2022, when the British and the American president at that time, Biden, sabotaged the peace. And now, frankly, you are seeing the British active as advisors and other things and trying to sabotage any peace agreement. The fact is that advisors will lose their relevance. Zelensky will lose their relevance if there's peace. Neither wants peace. They want a respite to restock and resupply, and the Europeans are going to do that. Now the Americans will not. So quite frankly, I don't mind listening to any amount of alternate reality.
Yes.
our friend, but this is my view. It's my honest view.
Right.
And it's a view based on geopolitical
Right.
reality as I see it. Thank
Ambassador
you.
Pradeep Kapoor, what shadow will be cast after this incident on the negotiations in Istanbul? How do you see them progressing?
Well, I think, of course, it will have an impact on the discussions in Istanbul. And, Uday, like in every story, in every act, in every incident, in every war, there are different versions, there are different perspectives, and there are different narratives. And here we are used to the European narrative, which I guess from their perspective may make some sense. But from the global perspective, I don't know how much sense it makes, because when you see it in a balanced way, to talk about Pakistan and India in the same vein, is something incomprehensible, because the terrorism definition, they have somehow got very confused, the Western world in particular, about the very definition of what is a terrorist state, what constitutes a terrorist act. And to equate the two, I think, is beyond all imagination and is quite incomprehensible. So I would appreciate if the gentleman refrains from such comparisons in the future. On the other hand, if you see the neutral narrative from a neutral perspective, which is more easily possible from another country, which is not a European country, or which is not Ukraine, or which is not Russia. So what does that bring? To the third party, when you see the Cuban crisis of 1960s, early 60s, when Russia tried to put missiles on Cuba, America laid a siege, America objected, and the Russians had to withdraw. Now, Ukraine-Russia border is the biggest border in Europe of any two countries. And Ukraine is the biggest country after Russia in Europe. Now, if you are opening up that flank, there are Western designs, Western plans, Western strategies to break up Russia into 6 countries or maybe more countries, 10 countries. If they are spanning half the world in terms of 11 time zones, they would have spanned more than 11 if they're not given up Alaska to America. It would have been more than half the world itself in terms of the spanning the time zones. So how do we break up this mighty country, this great country, this old country, this country which is strategically
Yes.
very rich in depth? It has got a lot of strategic depth, got a lot of minerals, got a lot of resources.
Right.
So they don't understand that doing what they are doing, they're pushing it further into the Chinese camp and creating a greater risk for themselves.
Okay.
Because Russia aligned with China, synced with Pakistan, synced with Iran, synced with North Korea,
Okay.
is a much greater threat to the Western world and to Europe in particular, rather than a Russia which is neutral or not is antagonistic to
Okay, let me
Europe.
take that to Major Lanuj Mathur as well. Major Lanuj Mathur, what are the lessons to be drawn on warfare as well from this strike that has been conducted in Russia by Ukraine? Warfare is evolving, changing with each passing year, in fact, each passing month. What are the lessons on the future of warfare that can be drawn from what happened yesterday?
Uday, before I go on to that, let me also add a little to what is being discussed.
Yes.
We must remember these things have been discussed today on this channel many number of times. We must remember Osama bin Laden was found where. We must remember that same Osama bin Laden had given 10 million rupees to Markaz in Muridke, which houses LET. LET, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, the hardcore international terror organizations. Any comparison with any country in the world, with Pakistan, the word you have used, bizarre, it's worse than that. 1. 2, when we talked about Russia, this history also is known. When the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, a clear-cut promise was made that the NATO will not move an inch eastwards. Then NATO moved and engulfed 14 nations, forgetting about an inch or millimeter or whatever. So that is the issue. When you come bang on the border of the Russia, that is Georgia and Ukraine. That is the time they retaliated. So let us not compare a mighty Russia with a rogue on the verge of a brink of a breakup Pakistan. I think there can be no comparison which can be worse than that under this head. Now, as far as the military brilliance is concerned, no doubt about it. The operation has been planned meticulously. It has been executed with surgical precision. But I must tell you, Uday, it is directly related to the talks that is to take place, because 18 months they've been planning. This could have been done a week earlier or a week later. Why today? Today, because they want to enter the table, the negotiating table from a position of greater strength by communicating to the Russians that we can strike you deep inside you and hard. This is what is the thing. And so it is directly related, as I look at it, with the talks that are taking place today. That is one point. And second thing, total surprise. A very big principle of war is surprise. A total surprise. If you can hide a plan of this kind for 18 months, a Ukrainian intelligence agency cannot, by itself, I think, achieve this. There are people who are helping, and the Russians know who they are. And these people are who they are. And you will see a massive retaliation, just short of a nuclear, because Russia also understands what is the meaning. They are a very, very responsible nation as far as I feel.
Okay.
And I can, yes. So
Okay.
this military-wise
All
operation.
right. All right. Point taken. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us. We've run totally out of time. We have to slip into a very short break. Much more on the other side.